Seneca, letter 18. I'm going to be making two videos on this one. Um, there's always two parts. There's like a final word that has nothing in each letter that has nothing to do with the body of the letter. But anyway, um, this was pretty interesting because it's about moderation, but not in the way that you might think. Um, It is in times of security that the spirit should be preparing itself to deal with difficult times. I think that's kind of interesting. While fortune is bestowing favors on it, then it is time for it to be strengthened against her rebuffs. So the basic idea is that if you're doing well, if it's a peaceful time for you, then it's good to prepare for when it's not a peaceful time. That kind of makes me think of there's a saying that is attributed to Solomon. We don't actually know. I'm starting to get that lens flare that there. There's a saying attributed to Solomon. We don't know who if he did say it or not. It's not in the Bible, but um, someone asked for advice that is going to be just as applicable in good times as bad times, and he said, "This too shall pass." So it's not a direct correlation. It doesn't mean the same thing. It just made me think of that. But the idea is that this too shall pass. Was if you're in good times, there's going to be bad times coming. If you're in bad times, there's going to be good times coming. Just always be aware of that. But the point that Seneca is getting at here, uh, is that if you want a man to keep his head when the crisis comes, you must give him some training before it comes. So whatever you have, well, here's just kind of an example. If you, it's not exactly the same thing, but it's at least pretty close. Like when you have money, maybe you can save it for leaner times, whenever it's a little more difficult. Um, and he actually goes so far as to say, and this is kind of interesting, is that while you're like, let's say if you have a lot of money, and this is more direct to the point. This is the example that he uses. Um, Maybe spend a day or two or a week trying to live as if you don't have a lot of money. I feel like I've heard people talk about this actually. Like maybe have rice and beans for every meal, since for a lot of people in the world that is every meal for them, and see if you can live with that. Uh, I've been actually trying to do this with DoorDash because somehow I got into a terrible habit with DoorDash, and I need to it's just so easy to do it, and it's so much money, and I need to quit doing that. It's not quite the same thing, I guess, but it's similar at least. Like that's a luxury that I should be able to do without. It's wasteful. I shouldn't be doing that. But the idea is basically while you're rich, see if you can handle being poor, and even practice it so that if you need to face that one day, you can deal with it. And he compares that to a soldier that in peacetime is training for war. Like whenever we have, like, the United States has been at war continuously for over 20 years now, at least. Um, but whenever we did have times of peace, the military wasn't inert. It was still practicing. We still had boot camps. We still had um, they were still doing drills. They were still training. But here's what's something interesting. So when we talked about the like whenever you're rich, try to practice being poor to make sure you can handle it in case you do become poor someday. Um, There is no reason, mind you, why you should suppose yourself to be performing a considerable feat in doing this. You will only be doing something done by thousands upon thousands of slaves and paupers. I think that's pretty interesting. If you do have beans and rice for every meal, is that impressive? It is impressive that you were able to will yourself to do that when you had the option not to, but the act itself, not really, since people do that all the time. Uh, and he says that he says that take credit that you're doing it of your own free choice, but I think I just think it's a good time to try to learn how to be poor when you're not poor. And there's actually people talking about those. See people talking about new poor, old poor, like old poor teaching new poor how to do things. That's like a meme now because the economy's been so bad for so long. Um, some people did this to kind of an extreme situation. It doesn't necessarily. The example used is money, being rich and poor, but it's not necessarily has to do with exclusively money. Um, I wish I could think of another example off the top of my head, though. But I guess I would say if you no, I could think of these like let's War and Peace. That example um, for that Seneca used. But let's say you're running a business or you work in a business where you have some seasons are more hectic than others. Well, in the times whenever you're not that hectic, you can get ready for the times that are more hectic in different ways. You could do practice things or whatever you need to do to get ready for that. And a lot of this has to do with the idea of being independent of fortune, in good fortune or bad fortune. Uh, be able to handle living in poverty and being content in that. So that just goes back to what I was saying with like one of those previous videos. He even says, start cultivating a relationship with poverty. Then he quotes Virgil. It says, for no one is worthy of a god unless he has paid no heed to riches. So you should live in a way, and this guy wasn't poor. Seneca was really important in the empire. He was an advisor to Nero. Um, but he said you should live as if money doesn't is not important to you, or at least learn how to live that way at the very least. So yeah, that's how do these videos keep getting so much longer than I expect them to be? But yeah, that's letter 18.